predictable COVID search behavior, as well as the second item for active and passive automation. And our Blair will cover the sections on 3 here, how we can use call data to fuel PPC automation.
That was really rude of me to give you a tongue twister, wasn't it?
Predictably unpredictable is a little challenging.
I promise everyone that's the only Dr. Seuss-esque thing that I'll do. Actually, I can't make that promise. But so we're going to dive in. And frankly, as we're going through this webinar, I certainly hope we recover soon. As you can see, my mushroom-shaped haircut right now. But I mean, look, as we explore some searcher behavior and what the start of COVID did, the start of pandemic did, and what's happening now, it's pretty dynamic. It moves pretty fast. But the fact of the matter is, automation doesn't see that. Automation sees data. So what we have to do is look at data parallels to figure out how well data can keep up. But I want to start with a little bit of cultural anthropology, if you will. I'm a little bit of an anthropologist and psychologist at heart, so I feel weird saying this, but this pandemic has been really fascinating for me, and I've learned a lot, and frankly had some fun looking at some of the stuff, which has been interesting. But so, I mean, I typed in the 2 words that I frankly have made my team put in the swear jar, and they're not allowed to say them anymore. But the word unprecedented, again, from a data perspective, this is not unprecedented. Obviously, it's very different and very weird and different than any of us have experienced in our lifetimes. But to automation, this is not unprecedented. It's just a period of crazy volatility. The other phrase that I want us all to put in the swear jar and donate $1 to charity when we see it is the phrase new normal. What we can't look for is a return to where we were before. We all know that things like this will change a ton of behavior. So if you're looking for your metrics or your performance or what have you to look exactly like it did before COVID, before the pandemic, it won't. It was a different time period, but what we're instead looking for is stability, consistency, a return to, we'll stick with new consistency because I already said I can't say new normal. But so to bring the data point home, what I want everyone to look at, and I'm not going to do a poll question, but I want you to look at the 2 data sets. They represent the same retailer who is one of the larger retailers that sells basically everything. One of these 2 sets of data represents our performance from Q4 of 2019. The other set of data represents February, March, and April of this year. I know which one is which, but our data and our systems don't. You might be able to identify it, but when we think about some of the things that our core automation looks at, which is primarily CPC and conversion rate, that's what smart bidding optimizes based on, they look pretty similar. There's a spike, there's a sharp drop, there's a lot of advertisers coming and going out of the auction. So fundamentally, what we're really looking for is a data set. What can we learn from the data set, and how can we fuel automation with better information so the data set works a little bit better? And for reference, the bottom represents Q4 and the top represents COVID. Now you know. So the other challenge that we're facing, which is a little bit different from Q4, and frankly with other issues that we faced, but this actually winds up making a lot of sense when you start, again, thinking from a psychological and anthropological perspective. But if you look, usually the COVID-related, or obviously with all the civil unrest going on right now, all that information rises really fast. And then it tapers off pretty quickly, and we don't, to use the word of the day, very often have a second wave. Obviously, things, search volume like COVID and FaceMac is popping back up. But if you remember back in the day when everyone was, it's weird saying back in the day because this is literally 6 weeks ago, but when we were all stockpiling hand sanitizer and toilet paper, that fell right off a cliff very, very quickly once everyone had what they needed. I think my favorite thing about this has been watching the spike in dumbbells, and I'm really excited to see how many are on Craigslist in 6 months when we are all out of this. But this information looks pretty unpredictable. Like, we'd never see this before, but it's a little bit more predictable than you might think. And the way that we have to go about it is a little bit different. But I want to take a very, very brief summary of one of my favorite anthropological and consumer psychology books, but it's called Predictably Irrational. So there's like 10 points in there, and there's more than 10 points, but I'm going to focus on 4 key points. So number 1, human beings and human society is focused on relativity, meaning that we can't assign value to something, or we can't determine the scarcity of something without it being compared relative to something else. So the best point here is, say you have to compare a trip to France with free breakfast, a trip to Rome with free breakfast, or a trip to Rome without free breakfast. It's much easier to compare Rome with breakfast versus Rome without breakfast than it is to compare France to Rome. So most people would pick the Rome with free breakfast option. Sort of similar, and you can find this sort of thing with, again, the toilet paper saga or hand sanitizer saga. When you start to see a couple of news articles about how one city ran out of it, all of a sudden your brain starts to go to, oh no, that's going to happen in my city next. I have to get ahead of it. And given how fast things move on the internet, that's how we get those insane spikes and then pretty gradual fall-offs that we saw before. Number 2, supply and demand is arbitrary and created, which is relatively similar to the toilet paper example that we thought of. I can't think of a time in my life, present period included, where I could not buy toilet paper that I was not camping. So again, it's this sort of inspired demand, this implied demand, this fear of what might come. Number 3 is social norms are, generally speaking, more inspirational than market norms. And that means that people will look at what their friends are doing. They will look at social. They will look at that to figure out if they're making the right decisions or not. They won't necessarily look at what's happening in the true market itself. And number 4, expectations beget outcomes, meaning that if we have an expectation of something being out of stock, we will find an area where it is out of stock to make our own story feel better to ourselves and make us feel like we're making the right decision. Which in turn can mean that if people find one store where stuff is out of stock, then they start moving down the line and going a little bit crazy. So this is all pretty interesting, and these are really more human problems. And part of the reason why I want to talk about this is talking about how fast the trends will move. But I also want to talk about it from an automation perspective. So how can we find this stuff? How can we inspire our automation to make the right decisions and to treat customers in the way that they should be treated in this really fast-moving, confusing time? So to answer the question, can automation keep up? Short answer is yes. Long answer is complicated. So I'm going to go through 3 different elements of search automation, and then Blair's going to talk a lot about phone automation, as there's been I won't steal your thunder, but there's been a lot more phone calls than normally are, and there's a lot of different topics that weren't there before. So the first part we're going to talk about is targeting, keywords, landing pages, things like that. The second part, bidding and budgets, and the third is messaging and brand, and I call them choices because frankly that's what they are. And brand safety is a choice on your part. It is not automation's fault. So what I want to talk about with targeting, and this is a bit of a dovetail, and we'll get more into this. We'll get more into this over the course of the messaging portion, but I'm going to take away the idea of automation, and a way that you can look at it from a brand perspective is active versus passive targeting. So what I would consider active targeting is something that we are trying to do. We really want to be on this term. We really want to answer this question. We really want to drive this goal, and we have something that is specific for this person. So examples of that would be our really precise exact match keywords, picking out specific placements, really custom, really specific ad copy to a specific audience. That is active targeting. That is what most people think of when they think of paid search. Passive targeting, you can best think of it as automated targeting. That is, we're present, and it's cool that we're there, and we're all right with it, and it's relevant, but we're not actively trying to be. So a good example would be, again, BMM or phrase match, or close variants now since match types aren't a thing anymore. Dynamic search ads, or retargeting ads, or targeting some of Google's proactive audiences. More often than not, what we'll do is we'll serve people a somewhat piece of generic copy. It'll be relevant, but it won't be something that we're actively trying to point to people. So there's a big difference between these two, and it's a really important balance to make sure that your passive targeting doesn't take over your active targeting, things that you're actively trying to do, and that your passive targeting doesn't lead to any virtue signaling or making poor decisions that empower automation to move too fast in the wrong way. So when we're thinking about targeting, so obviously stuff is moving crazy fast right now. So this is a time period where my team has been really liberal with Google alerts. I tend to be a bigger fan of TalkWalker alerts because I think they're a little bit more thorough. Find really fast rising queries. Aside from these outside alerts, if you're more concerned with your specific campaigns or your specific account, find a script or two that will find things that rise significantly day over day. As we saw, the spikes will come fast. So looking at this week versus last week will probably be too slow. But if you can find these areas that are rising quickly, you can get ahead of them before they go nuts. The other things that I would recommend are, if you're not familiar with Engrams, it's a pretty readily available script if you search for them. But basically what it does is it finds language snippets and combines them together to figure out their occurrence, their performance, what have you. We run these pretty regularly for our accounts, but they can get overwhelming if you do them too frequently. But in COVID, time doesn't matter. So run them really regularly so you can start to find language spikes. Like you can find if customers are searching for hours more than they would have been before, or searching for open or recovery or social distancing or reservations or whatever you may need. Those are going to happen more frequently and move faster. So to prevent spending money on phone calls or conversions that you don't necessarily want, you'll want to find a way to actively target those language spikes to answer people's questions. Number 3, monitor inventory, both your own and your competitors. Humans have become a little bit locust-y when something is in high demand, meaning we move really fast from place to place. So when store 1 runs out of it, we go to store 2 and buy it until it's all gone, then store 3. So monitor both your own inventory and your competitors' inventory, since that will help predict demand. And number 4 is this I'll call it a playhouse that Google put together that shows rising and falling trends categorized. I don't know how this happened, but the default was golf bags, which if they built it for me or if that's like a preset automated targeting, they did really well. I've been playing a lot of golf. So I put together this little decision tree for what I'll consider active versus passive targeting. And again, remember, passive targeting is what we would consider, automated targeting. So first question, very easy. Do you want to show around this content? The answer is no. Exclude it, go nuts, get rid of it. The answer is yes. The next question would be, do you want to own the narrative? Meaning, do you want to make sure that you are controlling how much you spend there, how much you show there, who you show for, what you show for? If the answer is no, then keeping it automated with DSAs and RSAs combined is probably fine. If you do want to own the narrative, control how much you spend in a place, then the question is, do you want to actively message a response? And I say a response because you can consider every search is kind of a question. If the answer is no, again, keep your same ad copy, leave it automated, passive messaging, but active targeting, meaning we're controlling the budget. If the answer to all 3 questions is yes, then you better break those guys out and you better give them a specific message to make sure that you address the question in question. A good example here is being careful about it. Now, this is from about a month ago, so I think you can shop in Delaware now. But this is an example of Bed Bath & Beyond's homepage. So if you were to search for Bed Bath & Beyond contactless pickup or curbside pickup, DSAs would pick it up. They would show it. It would show in your search queries and you find all this information. But then if I go to do it, my nearest store, you can't do that. So that's an example of creating a bad customer experience by having poor passive targeting and poor passive messaging. So the next part that I want to talk about, and I think the most common question that we get is, does smart bidding work? Complicated question, but we'll talk about bidding and budgets and how you can protect those. So we'll start with, I don't want to call it stupid bid automation, but traditional bid automation. So when you think about this, and a lot of people do this on their campaigns now, a lot of it will influence smart bidding, but things like geo modifiers, demographic targeting, time of day of week targeting, you do that like once a year and then you kind of forget about it and then you analyze it later and you're like, I don't know if it helped or hurt. So we did that based on old pre-pandemic behavior. That behavior is real different now, and it's changing by the day. So this is something that you're going to have to evaluate a lot more frequently. So I'll give you a couple of examples. It's been the year of mobile since like 1979. So what's funny enough, though, is that mobile volume has been going down a good deal during the pandemic because people aren't mobile. Desktop usage has gone up because everyone brought their laptops home. Tablets are sort of sitting still, and things like YouTube TV, regular YouTube, OTT, that volume has increased as people are consuming more content directly from home. Now, if you had all of these presuppositions as to what a person is doing on their phone or what they're doing on their computer, or we don't want to target B2B on weekends because people aren't working, that may not be as true as it once was, as it may have been before. All that is evolving. The second thing is geo. So if you think about a normal day in New York, your search volume is going to be concentrated in Manhattan during most of the day, and then on the weekends it'll spread out. Guess what? No one's commuting downtown anymore. So your geo range winds up spreading a lot further. So that means all these geo bid modifiers that you had to reach really specific audiences at a really specific time in a really specific place, people aren't going there anymore. And if they are going, they're not going for the same reason or at the same time. So a lot of these things you'll have to evaluate sort of an in-pandemic vacuum and an out-of-pandemic vacuum. And obviously this is really heavily influenced based on how states reopen. I'm in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, and we're just starting to be able to leave our houses. So in turn, we're getting the very beginning of that spike of everyone furiously Googling, is my favorite restaurant open? Can I get a reservation? What can I do? In my particular case, can I please get a haircut? Please, I feel like someone's chasing me at all times. But all that stuff is going to be changing behavior. And I think my favorite part has been the evolution in time of day, day of week. So this is an example of one of our clients that is a pretty basic clothing retailer, and they didn't have any issues with stock or anything like that. But this is a reflection of our search volume over the course of a week. 3 months pre-pandemic, 3 months in the pandemic. So first of all, there's that normal commuter spike where everyone gets to work, but they're not ready for work yet and starts doing stuff at 9 a.m. That's pretty much evolved into the Garfield effect where everyone hates Mondays and searches for clothes all the time. Friday and Saturday nights were always really quiet times because people were out at restaurants and people were out with their friends or out at the bars or whatever. I don't want to make too many assumptions about my friends, but if they're anything like myself, you get kind of bored when you're at home and you're like, let's go shopping, woo! So we're seeing this weird spike in Friday and Saturday and Sunday evenings that never happened before. And then this sort of normal midweek thing, the middle of the week always used to sort of follow a consistent curve, and that's falling off now as people seem to be more dialed in on work from Tuesday to Thursday, and then Monday and Friday, they're just kind of trying to get in the groove. But again, if you have these preset notions of how you have your campaigns set up and targeted, people don't act the same way that they did before. So you have to make sure that this sort of automated targeting that is having these bid and decisions done based on one blanket modifier, you're going to have to reevaluate it. So again, the question we get the most is, can smart bidding move fast enough? Does smart bidding work? If it worked before the pandemic, it works in the pandemic. If it didn't work before, it doesn't work now. What we have found, and our clients tend to skew enterprise, is that smart bidding has moved plenty fast. It has done really well. It hasn't made too many arbitrary decisions unless we feed it decisions to make that report. So you think about smart bidding, and this is your very basic, bare bones explanation of what machine learning is. Smart bidding is a function that does something based on a set of inputs, in this case X, to an output, in this case Y. Then there's error that shows up sometimes that you could best, tail up to the learning period or the machine trying to figure out what's going on or the occasional misfire. That'll happen. So again, F is the bidding algorithm of choice. The algorithms have not changed because of COVID or the pandemic or whatever. They're the same. They are constant. What does change is X and Y, and that's what we have to work on. So error, again, when the algorithm goes nuts. If it went nuts before every so often, it's going to do that now. You just have to put these protections in place. X is in this world, basically all the inputs like demographics, expected targeting, queries, device history, whatever. This does change. And why desired outcomes or conversions, phone calls, emails, whatever, that sort of stuff, again, it is kind of consistent, but kind of not. So again, we're thinking about how behavior has changed. So the bidding algorithms didn't change. They still work the same way that they did. This, I think, is the core element that I really want to get across to most people, and Blair's going to talk about this a good deal throughout his segment. The outcome, conversions, the value of a customer is very likely very different during the pandemic, before the pandemic, and after the pandemic. Meaning what lifetime value analysis you had done on your normal customers, I have a sneaking suspicion all the new customers that you're acquiring during the pandemic are not your normal customers. So what that means is you have to feed the smart bidding or the bidding automation a different target to aim for because the expected long-term outcome is going to be different. And X, the inputs, I actually wouldn't worry too much about these. So most smart bidding and most bidding algorithms like SA360, Kenshu, whatever, yes, they look at really long-term history, but generally speaking, they're looking at like 30 days worth of data. Now, yes, data moves really fast, but most people are kind of dipping their toes in the water as to what they do, where they go, whatever. They obviously search volume changes really fast, but human behavior isn't changing that fast, at least not en masse. So, and errors are errors, but the way that we can minimize them is by controlling what X and Y are. So the core element that I really want to call out here is, yes, smart bidding can keep up. Yes, it works, as long as all of your other stuff works. But where you're aiming the machine is something that you're really going to have to evaluate and figure out if it's good for the long term, if your inventory changes, if your availability changes. All those are the sorts of things that you really have to keep a close eye on. So a good way to look at this is looking at your bid automation in the most volatile period that you've ever had before. If your bid automation kept up then, it will keep up now. Usually the fourth quarter is the best way to look at that. The other thing that I would recommend is knowing that in a learning period, smart bidding can go a little wild. I would recommend moving your budget caps closer to kind of a normal moving average rather than we want to make sure we capture all available volume. If volume goes up 100-fold in a given day, it'd be great if you got all those conversions, but I don't think you can fulfill all those orders. So not only will you get false positives and have to reset machine learning, you'll also have some really irate customers who don't get the stuff they thought they were going to get, like me, who tried to bulk order hand sanitizer at the beginning of the pandemic, and it didn't work, but I'm still clean. And again, making sure that your inputs, that is the bids that you have, the stock that you have, the human behavior that you have, is accurate for the time period, not just based on what you've seen forever. So last but not least, I'm going to talk about messaging and brand choices. And I call them choices because it's you figuring out what message you want to send out. You can either business as usual, you can attack the what I call implied questions. That is, someone who is searching for a brand term now may or may not look for your hours that you're open, but odds are it's someone in someone's head. So rather than making someone take a breadcrumb trail, or as Blair's going to talk about, a spike in COVID calls, making them call your store, and then in turn you think that call is valuable, but it's really not, 'cause it's just a phone call, you can proactively answer some of these questions. So really need to make sure that your ads are, accurate, true, and look at, I'll call it hidden automation. So all of your extensions. I would have a sneaking suspicion you probably have a come see us today or a book an appointment buried somewhere in all of your site links or your review extensions, or maybe your hours are hidden in structured snippets. Or in this particular case, TGI Fridays, hours and services may vary. That means that I'm going to call you to find out when those are to find out if you're open. So a little bit of self-serving because it's our client, but California Closets, we didn't really change a whole lot. We didn't say crazy messaging, but we do say free virtual consultations now. So, okay, instead of going in your house, we do it virtual. Answers a question people may not have had and makes them feel comfortable. This is the third color that my office has been during COVID, so I started looking at painters. And this is okay, but it doesn't address anything. It doesn't address the obvious questions that we're having. So in turn, I'm going to ask them. And then the last one is just poor. I'm assuming that this was, it's mean to pick on a small business, but I'm assuming that was from an automated campaign, but haircuts still aren't open here. So I don't know why you're saying on request appointment available, because it's not. It's just not. Now, with all this stuff, there's a risk reward entailed in saying something. There's a risk reward in not saying something. There's a risk reward in addressing things. There's a risk and reward in not addressing things. So this Ben & Jerry's ad, which, brief fun fact, I grew up with the CEO of Ben & Jerry was one of our hockey families. So I have never paid for Ben & Jerry's ice cream. And it also explains a lot about my figure. But they have been well known for a long time as a company that fights hard and loud for social justice. So this was entirely on brand. I do not think that they actively tried to do this. I'm pretty sure, based on the length of this headline, it's a DSA. So this is something that shows, okay, automation is going right. It fits with the brand. If I were them, I may have split out a campaign to actively talk about it or actively target my ads. But I have a sneaking suspicion this was passive targeting gone right. Bed Bath & Beyond, again, they're ones who I just searched a brand term and I didn't ask them about curbside pickup, but they have this nice little thing here, now hoping that they're open. And then last but not least, there's also a risk with not saying anything or putting up a stand. So this was an article that was in Ad Age, that was written by Vice, and they talked about the complicated factor of, excluding really controversial topics like Black Lives Matter, COVID, pandemic, government, as we have election season coming up. A lot of companies are just saying like, hey, let's not be there at all. But that creates a complicated social statement. So I will say that this is a time that I'm very happy that I'm not a brand marketer, because it's a really complicated decision. But when you're thinking about automation and thinking about what you're doing on purpose versus what is just happening, it's a time you're going to have to make those decisions and feel comfortable with them and stand by them, rather than just sort of hoping that something will happen. So the last 2 points that I'm going to talk about is this pandemic is global. So that means all of us who are having trouble getting to work, or those of you who are working with children at home and trying to get them to shut up. Google and Microsoft and Facebook are the same way. So if you have automated scheduling to go up, you might want to keep some historical stuff live, because review periods and appeal periods are really slow now. So make sure that you are thinking about the human side of automation, that while the ads are automated for us, and they're mostly automated for the system, they're not for everything. And if something goes wrong, there's no one there to help, or there might not be anyone there to help. So last but not least, I'm going to quote like the third or fourth smartest person I know, which is me. But so this is a piece on Think with Google that I was really happy to be included in. But it's a weird time. Stuff is really weird. Looking at year over year for forecasting doesn't really work anymore. What instead we have to look for is stability, and that stability will let us know when things are a little bit flatter, and when the tweaks and toys that we've done to our automation is set, and we can just let it fly. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Blair to talk about phone calls and the COVID effect.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron. We already saw a bunch of great questions come in, but let me share my screen here. And just a reminder that if you do have questions for Aaron, time permitting, we'd love to do some Q&A at the end. So just keep putting in your questions into the chat or the QA, and we'll get to them time permitting as much as possible. That being said, I do have a pretty full agenda. Anyone who's been on a webinar with me, I like to pack as much information and data and strategies as I can into the topic. And I'd love to start by setting the stage, much like what Aaron did, by showing you some stats specifically around the phone calls being generated from paid search marketing and the importance of those calls. Think about the marketing you're doing right now, the types of conversions you're looking to drive, and where you're driving those conversions, and think about the types of paid search campaigns and tactics you're running as well. And if you're not doing anything with phone calls, I think you'll find that if you just did nothing else but incorporated some of these strategies into your overall process, you're going to see a decent lift either in conversions or a decrease in your cost per lead because you're making better optimizations. But that's my tease. Let me go into the data here about phone calls and their value. So as it says, phone calls were very valuable search conversions for most businesses before COVID-19. You can see some stats here that bear this out. Mobile, as Aaron talked about how the year of mobile has been happening for about 40 years. But, and that's true. We've been talking about it for what seems like a very, very long time. But, all studies show that search ad spend is growing because, they're targeting more ad spends being targeted towards mobile and smartphones. And it just makes sense that when someone searches or engages with an ad on their smartphone, it's the easiest path to conversion is a phone call. So you can see here 61 billion calls were generated last year to businesses just from mobile search ads. And you can see how that is growing. That's 113% more than 2014. The more businesses spend on smartphones and targeting mobile ads there, search ads specifically in this case, the more calls they'll be generated. And that's actually good news for a lot of businesses, certainly our customers, because phone calls, usually when someone calls you, it's a higher intent lead. They convert 30% faster than people who are still browsing online, and they often tend to spend more. They're calling you because they have questions. Usually it's a larger purchase, and they tend to spend more and actually churn less and stay loyal. So good news, but it's not just marketing that's happening on smartphones. So you can see here there are many industries where phone calls are a very important part of the customer journey, whether it's automotive or financial services, healthcare, home services, insurance, travel, anywhere where you're selling something that is urgent, like home services where someone needs to call right away, or it's a complicated purchase like insurance, or it's expensive or infrequent like automotive. People have questions, they want to call. That call might not be a sale, but it might be a path to a sale either online or, back in the day, it would be in person in a store. So calls were important before COVID, and calls are actually even more important now. Since COVID has happened. And that's really because of the lockdowns and the fact that stores are closed. Now they're reopening. And the fact that people are confused and they have questions and they need to get those answered before they can make a purchasing decision. So here's some stats from a study from Brandify that shows this is not paid search, but it is Google My Business actions that are being taken before and during COVID. And I think it's pretty indicative of the changing consumer behavior that we're seeing. So before COVID, back in February, which seems like forever ago, most of the time when someone engaged with your Google My Business listing, they were looking for driving directions. Calls were a secondary action. However, you can see once the COVID really hit the US and the lockdown started happening, look at that massive spike in March. Over almost 2 billion calls just to businesses were generated on March 21st, which is like 3 times what they were before. Now, that trend has leveled off a bit, but even in April, you can see how, Google My Business was generating twice as many calls during that time than it was before COVID. Still more calls than driving directions and website visits. So consumer behavior is changing, has changed. People want to call businesses far more often than they did before. Here's some data from Dialogue Text customers. That study covered April. Let's look at May. As the lockdowns were, slowly lifting in many parts, you could see how businesses that were getting calls before are getting even more calls now. So here's some just lifts in call volumes being driven to these industries that are customers of ours. And some are massive, like a massage franchise, for example, people are calling to see if they're open. I was watching the Today Show this morning, and it said that people were buying above ground pools. There's a huge run on them. Businesses have sold out, across the country. Their phones are ringing off the hook. Same thing with like nail salons, phones ringing off the hook. If you do a search for that in Google, you'll see all these examples of articles where the phones are ringing off the hook because, the pent-up demand in some cases, and then obviously COVID as well. So let's dive into the data and strategies that you can use to improve your PPC automation using calls and call conversions. So I just spent a lot of time showing you the value and volume of calls, which is true, but it's also important to know that not every call that you're going to be spending money to generate into your business, your call centers, your locations, maybe your remote agents these days, is a good lead. We get some data across the board from us. 78% of calls to businesses are not sales leads. They could be support calls. They could be a cancellation of an appointment. They could be spam. They could be someone trying to solicit your business or looking for a job, something that's not an actual sales lead. So ask yourself, if you don't have data, do you know if you're wasting budget or not to drive the wrong types of calls from your campaigns, depending on what your goals are? We also see that 52% of good leads, the right type of lead being driven over the phone to a business, doesn't convert to a sales opportunity. So as a marketer, you could do all the right things to get that call to come to your call center or your locations, but it's half of them aren't converting to appointments or opportunities or customers. So do you know that? Do you know what the problem is? Is there data that can help you improve that side of the house to really see a lift in your ROI? And lastly, a common problem, 20% of all calls to businesses either hang up or get sent to voicemail. So again, you're spending this money to generate what could be a great lead into your locations, into your call centers, but the experience is poor, they're not being answered, or they're being kept on hold too long. Do you know that as a marketer? Do you know that that is impacting the ROI and your investment in paid search and other marketing? So let's look at some of the data that you should be thinking about around calls that can really help you significantly, if you're not doing it now, impact your ROI. So if you have no data at all on calls being driven from paid search in this case, that's bad. If you just know that what keywords are driving calls, that's good. That's a great start. It's even better to know that from my keywords, this keyword, keyword A, for example, in this case, a call was generated from it at this time on this day from a person who visited this particular landing page on desktop, and this is the person and their phone number. So now you're connecting it to the actual person, from the keyword to the call to the person and the experience on your website. And the best possible data would be that you have all of that, plus you know that this person who called was a quality lead. They ended up converting, they booked an appointment in this case, and they booked it for one of your higher priced services. So that is the ideal data set for what you should be looking at for calls. Now, it's possible to get this type of data now through call tracking and actually through AI, conversation analytics, which is all packaged together. So, think about as a marketer, if you're generating 100, 1,000, we have customers generating several 100,000 calls a week into their business and getting analytics on those calls at scale using AI. So you can see from a phone conversation, the AI can pull out really actionable insights from the call, depending on what it is you're looking for your business. So in this example, it's a call to a plumber. The caller is having issues with their toilet. So if you're a plumber, that's great. That's a sales lead. It's talking about COVID. So all of a sudden, you know that this conversation mentioned something about the COVID or the coronavirus, and you can tag it as such. It asked how much do they charge, so there's price discussed. There's another KPI you can link to this call. I really need this ASAP. It's got urgency. Another KPI you can link to this call. And then at the end, they scheduled an appointment for tomorrow. So check that box as well. It was a conversion to an appointment. You can then take this data, and in our case, we can generate a lead score specific to your business for how great a conversion from this keyword and this person was to your business. And we can pull out AI can pull out all kinds of data. So it's not just these are just examples. There's all kinds of KPIs that you can pull out of a conversation in order to get real interesting analytics at scale from the calls you're driving. So this is how you can start putting that call data into practice. So I know a lot of people like to get the recordings of these webinars, or they ask for the slides. So I like to put a really detailed slide into the flow of how you can capture call data and start actioning upon it. So obviously you can capture the attribution data, all about the caller themselves, link it as well as what drove the call from the channel, ad, keyword search, the web pages they viewed and called from, etc. All that data pre-call about what generated the call and who the caller is, where they are, where they're calling. Then that data can be linked to the insights that AI drives from the actual conversations. And that data can be linked together and activated into Google Ads or Google Analytics or Salesforce or Search Ads 360 or any of the other tools you're using to measure and optimize your paid search spend. And then you can take action on that data to measure the true impact of your campaigns and keywords, as well as start making really intelligent optimizations from your messaging and your bid strategies and your targeting in order to drive more customers and conversions and reduce your CPL. So look at what that looks like. 2 examples in Google Ads for calls. So if you've got the data on the left, that's great. If you're able to include columns for calls from your landing pages and calls from your call extensions directly from the ads, and that data is living within Google Ads and it's with all your online conversion data, great. It's even better if you can get nuanced data into the quality of those calls, whether they're good calls, whether they converted, what their lead score is, whether they're just not qualified calls, and have that data separated into your Google Ads account so that Google can start taking the right actions for you through automation, which is what we're going to start digging into next. So here are some of the strategies I want to cover around how you can leverage all that data to drive better results from PPC automation. So the first way, and Aaron talked about smart bidding, I think Google said that around 70% of their advertisers are using smart bidding in some capacity. So if you're one of those, or you're looking to get into it, and calls are an important conversion for you, getting that data nuanced into not just the total calls driven by your keywords, but the quality of those calls, the outcomes of those calls, the value of those calls, and putting that data into Google Ads so that their smart bidding algorithm can factor that data into their bidding optimization. So for example, a common strategy for Google Smart Bidding would be to just drive the most conversions regardless of their value. So if all conversions are equal to you, you don't have higher priced or lower priced services, you just want to have the smart bidding algorithm drive conversions online or over the phone. You've got this data in there. You can separate the bad calls from the good calls, and Google can optimize based on that for target CPA or the maximize conversion strategy. If you want to have Google optimize based on the value of the conversions, not just the volume of actual conversions, the lead score data, the actual conversions from calls that are in here can help them do that. So target ROAS is one of those strategies, for example, or they have maximized conversion value, another strategy that you can select on in order to, and use this data to drive better outcomes from your smart bidding strategies. You can also use caller data and the conversations that happened on those phone calls to bucket your callers into the right audiences for Google for remarketing or lookalike audience or so forth. So, in our case, Dialogue Tech can put all those KPIs that you care about. Is it a new caller? Did it convert? Is it a sales lead? Did it convert? Whatever, or did it not convert? Whatever that data is you want into Google Analytics, for example. And if you're building your audiences for Google Ads off of Google Analytics, you can include that caller data there. Or because we capture the caller ID of the person, you can use, you can build audiences off of caller IDs, your custom audiences into Google Ads. So for example, here, let's say somebody called your call center or your location. They're a good lead, but they didn't actually go on to book an appointment or make a purchase. You can then retarget them with a specific campaign, with a specific offer, bid more for them because you know they're good leads and you want your ads to show. If you have things you can do to cross-sell or upsell people who called and booked, you can put those callers into specific audiences as well. You can put your good callers into your lookalike audiences and show them so you can expand your reach and target people who have never been to your site but who have all the signals of being a good person who's called based on your list of good callers. Or you can suppress people. If someone's called and bought something from you or booked an appointment, or they called and canceled an appointment, or they called and they're not a good sales lead, suppress them. Don't waste money showing them ads anymore. And these audiences can also be factored into your smart bidding. So if you have these audiences that live within Google Ads or Google Analytics and get passed over, Google Ads can take audiences into account when it's doing its smart bidding optimizations as well. So in terms of automation strategies, you can also use these audiences or use the if function in Google Ads. So the if function, a lot of advertisers have multiple audiences within a campaign. The if function allows you to show different messaging to those audiences within your ad campaign automatically. Google will automate messaging based on, who those people are. So in this example, if you've got phone leads that didn't convert, you can just say if someone in this audience runs a search, I want my text to say call back now for 20% off, a special offer. Or if they're not part of these phone leads audience, you can just have your usual get your free estimate today call to action. You can also do this for devices. So, if you want to have special messaging for your mobile devices about call now, you can do that here, or you can do it for if your desktops you don't want a call now message, you can do that with the if function. Pretty cool stuff. Aaron touched on dynamic search ads briefly, but if you're doing dynamic search ads, they basically look at your site and they pull out the keywords, the headlines, the landing pages based on the content there, and they do some of that automation and messaging and bidding for you based on that. So one thing you can do is you can tell Google what URLs, what landing pages or web pages on your site that you actually want to use for dynamic search ads. And if you can do that by taking into account the call data. So for example, you can see that these web pages are driving a high volume of good calls that converted. Let's use those in your dynamic search ads versus these web pages are not driving any calls or conversions at all. Let's not use those and send people to those pages. You can also optimize for the interactions driving the most valuable calls. So calls are driven by, from paid search at least, from call extensions, from call-only ads, which are now called call ads, or from calls that go on, for people who go onto your web page and call. So you can see here by looking at the data on the left, look at your campaigns, look at what interactions are driving calls and valuable calls, and then make decisions whether or not you want to do some bid adjustments to show your call extensions more often, whether you want to eliminate your pay on call-only ads, or you just want to have people go to your web pages first because that's what drives the highest volume of calls that convert to appointments, opportunities, and customers. You can also put your call data into your bid management tools, whichever ones you're using now. And by having that call data in there, the bid management tool can automatically optimize for the keywords driving not just the best online conversions, but the best call conversions as well. And Terminex, a customer of ours and an Aaron's company, Tenuity, Tenuity helped them do this. They were driving, by putting that call data from Dialog Tech into their bid management platform, they were able to drive some pretty cool and impressive optimization results. So if you don't have call data in your bid management tools, I highly recommend it. to drive results. Here is a quick customer success story of ours with a company called Comfort Keepers that sort of shows a lot of these strategies I've touched on. Comfort Keepers is a senior care provider, and their marketing team is responsible for sending leads to over 650 franchisee locations. So they're running paid search to do that. We're talking about multi-location paid search campaigns. But the challenge for Comfort Keepers is one, these franchises, for senior care, people often call. 70% of their sales conversions are from phone calls. But they also have campaigns that they're trying to drive job applicants. So they have two big audiences, sales conversions for the business, but as well as job applicants for the franchisees, for caregivers. So they run campaigns to drive calls from both of those audiences. So they use dialogue tech to capture at the keyword level what was actually driving calls. And they put that data into Search Ads 360. And you can see here, the first year they did this, they drove 41% more calls. The second year, they kept optimizing. They drove 59% more calls than the previous year, all while reducing their cost per call by 50%. So really great optimizations just by getting call volume data into their tools. Now, they then started using our AI to get call value data to see if it was when the call happened, if it was an actual sales lead, if it converted to an appointment, if it was a job applicant, or if it was some other type of caller. And by getting those audiences and that value data passed directly into Google Ads, Smart Bidding was able to help do some optimizations there. And you can see some of the gains, the additional gains they got, 20% more calls that were sales inquiries, 50% more sales conversions from calls, 14% more conversions from job applicants by getting that nuanced data and value from calls into their system. Now, the last section I have before the Q&A, and I touched on this a little bit already, is that as marketers, it is important to detect and be able to understand the calls we're driving into our call centers and locations, what's happening with them. Are bad experiences hurting our ROI? I think in marketing, the mantra with locations and call centers should always be trust but verify, right? It's important, not all locations are going to give you accurate data, performance data back. Some of your locations might be regularly complaining that you're not doing a good enough job sending them leads. But the data might be different. The data might show you are sending them leads. They're just not answering the phone. And when they're getting good leads, they're not doing a great job converting them. So you can look at some of your reports in order to make those decisions. And then if you're having issues, you can work directly with that location or call center in order to diagnose and correct issues that are hurting your ROI that really are not your fault because you're doing the right things to drive the right calls, but they're not being answered enough at a good enough rate, or they're not being converted well enough. And those reports can show you, which locations have issues. You can also drill into your recordings and transcriptions of the calls in order to get real nuanced data into what those issues are. So for example, if you see that your location in Cincinnati got a ton of great phone leads, but really did not convert them at a high rate, you can pull up those calls just for that location for this month or this week and look at the calls and see what the people answering the phones are doing badly. They're not mentioning the right scripts. They're not asking for appointments, etc. What are they doing that's impacting your ROI that if they were corrected, you would see that ROI spike? That's the mystery shopping and the call coaching component of this. You can also look at the questions that people are asking nowadays. So, as Aaron said, consumer behavior is changing. We're sort of in this crazy time where some of the data you had and assumptions you had 2-3 months ago might not apply right now. Look at some of the questions people are asking, either around COVID or just around your business and your products. And if you understand what those questions are and you answer them, either in your ad copy or in your landing pages, your product pages, your website, FAQ lists, people might be more likely to convert because those questions that they're calling you about are being answered on your site. They might even convert online and not have to call you because you've provided them all the information they need to make a decision. We've got 2 customers that have seen great success with each of these use cases. One is a very large auto repair and tire dealer. They've got over 1,200 locations. They looked at the unanswered call data for each of the locations on a regular basis. When they saw that 30% of their calls are not being answered, and they worked with their locations to drive that down just to 20%, that meant an additional $6 million in revenue each month because of the value of calls and the volume of calls they were driving, just because they answered more of those calls. Another customer of ours, 1,000 Bulbs, they send calls into a call center. They look at their marketing team, pulls a list from Dialogue Tech of every call that was a good lead but did not convert to a sales order. They then review those calls with the call center agents and managers in order to see what they could have done differently to convert them. And this tactic has helped them increase call to sales conversion rates by 18%. Again, the marketing isn't doing anything differently. It's just helping out with the call experience in order to improve your ROI. So I really hammered through my section. I hope that was interesting and insightful for you guys. If you want more information on strategies, best practices, success stories on using call analytics for paid search or other marketing, you can visit our website. We've got a bunch of resources there. If you want a demo of the Dialogue Tech call tracking and analytics platform, we'd be happy to walk you through it as well. Just visit our website. And Aaron, if I could bring you back in, I know that people who are interested in getting Tenuity's help with driving better results from paid search, I'm sure you'd love to talk to them as well.
Yeah. If there are a few questions on there, and I know that we're running long, so I'm not sure that we'll be able to get to them. But you can either go to our Contact Us form, and we'll give you a one-on-one audit. We have a couple of people on our team with some bandwidth, so happy to take a look at what you're doing and hopefully help you out. If you want to email me directly, my email is just first name dot last name at Tenuity, and I'm happy to help out if people need it.
So I know we promised you a 60-minute masterclass, and we sure went the distance on it. If people are willing to stay on for a minute or two, maybe Jenny, I can bring you back in and we can ask a few quick questions to Aaron or to myself, and try to get through a few of them. And whichever questions we don't answer, we'll be happy to follow up with you directly via email and get those answers for you.
Okay. Well, we do have a couple of questions if there's time for one.
Sure, go for it.
Okay, sure. So Aaron, I think this is for you. What happens if we have a second wave? Can automation keep up with the downtrends too?
Same. I'd say the same challenges and the same issues that if we have a second wave, I don't think that we should treat it like the current state, because I think that people will lock up in a different way. So rather than worrying about like, oh no, it's just a continuation, I think a second wave would be a different audience than the first wave. But same comment, if your automation kept up with all the volatility that happened over the past 3 months, it'll keep up in the next set as well. But again, I would recommend that if it does happen, and it doesn't, you treat the second wave audience in a little bit of isolation from the first wave audience.
Understood. And is there anything that should not be automated?
I think I covered it for the most part, but generally speaking, anything where you want to make a statement, anything where you want to actively state something and you want to make sure you have a firm statement, a good rule of thumb is if your automation goes wrong, is that okay? So, if you share the wrong image to the wrong person, or if you call me Mrs. Aaron instead of Mr. Aaron, is that okay or not? And if the answer is no, then I wouldn't recommend automating it. If the answer is yes, that the decision was close enough, then let it fly.
I get that issue with my name all the time, with the Mr. and Mrs.
I get ERIN on my coffee cup all the time.
Yeah.
So Blair, what do you think is the best way to discourage unwanted or COVID-related phone calls?
Yeah, it is a great question. If you don't want calls coming in that are specifically about COVID or tactics like store hours, I think Aaron touched on it actually really well in his part about putting that information into your ad copy as well. We have customers who are doing this. They're looking at, as I said, some of the calls that are coming in and the questions they're asking specifically around COVID, and they're creating FAQ pages, for example. If you go to any business's website, you'll probably see it at the top. They have, here are the FAQs around COVID. Addressing those there is one way to maybe help curb those calls into your business if you don't want them. Another way might be if you have an IVR. IVR is those automated phone menus. If someone calls your location, you can put store hour updates up there as well if you just don't want to handle the call. If you're finding out from your call data, for example, that a high percentage of your calls from paid search for particular keywords or in particular locations, let's say you have a high volume of calls going to Chicago locations that are discussing COVID, maybe you want to pull off your call extensions from those geolocations and just have them find you via, go to your site or find you via paid search, by SEO or Google My Business. So you don't curb the calls, but you curb the expense of the calls. Aaron, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think you handled it well. I know we have a tangential question about like what happens if you do get those bad calls and train them down. Exactly what you said is if you start getting a lot of iffy calls, bid them down, find the source. A lot of the technology, the dialogue tech, and that we worked with Terminex on allowed us to pinpoint that like a ton of bad calls are coming from keyword X or keyword Y or whatever, or audience X, audience Y. So in those sorts of scenarios where there's one particular area, it's usually isolated and you can usually find it. So for those ones that tend to yield a bunch of COVID calls but have some good ones in there, let's split them out, maybe pull them out from automation because the automation will treat all those signals as good. So hold them out and manage those ones either manually or with automation with different guardrails.
So I know we're over the time. It looks like we've got to wrap up. Sorry if we didn't get to a lot of the questions, but we will follow up with you either Dialogue Tech will or Tenuity will, depending on who the question is for and the topic. But we will follow up with you via email to get all your questions answered. I'll just wrap up. Jenny, thank you so much. Aaron, obviously it's a pleasure again to have you on webinars with us. I hope the audience loved and got a lot of value out of the content. I know it was eye-opening. Your section was for me. So with that, just good day, everybody. Stay safe, and good luck optimizing your paid search.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for joining.